where Candy was found. Spokane County at that time was very rural. There weren't many houses then. There are quite a few houses in that area now. This is an actual capture or picture of the brush pile Candy is concealed in, another taken with a little better light. An autopsy is done the next day on March 23rd. The cause of death is determined to be strangulation. There is very obvious sexual assault, and Candy's feet are bound with a torn strip of her own slip, and another piece of that fabric is also knotted around her neck and used to strangle her as a ligature. Because this area is in unincorporated Spokane, and this would be the same case today, the Spokane County Sheriff's Department launches a homicide investigation. I tried to capture some pictures from the detectives involved, but the short story on this is every detective was involved for both the city and the county. But these three men are Spokane County Sheriff's Department detectives. It's hard to say what everyone's role was because they were all pitching in, but I do know that Detective James Allen was the lead on that. This fell on his shoulders, and he carried this case for the rest of his career. Even though he had promoted beyond the rank of detective, I think he retired as a captain. He continued to work on the case. Tips come in droves, hundreds of tips. Eventually these files will become public and everyone will be able to see these, and I think most people would be impressed by the number of calls and reports that came in. And over the years they worked through these. And in the early 60s there was promise. There were things that looked good as far as suspects go. Hugh Morris is a name that emerged early in the case. In 1963, this gentleman, Frank Hayes Johnson, and Detective Allen worked on that. They actually traveled to Minnesota. Hugh Morris was in prison or incarcerated there pending trial for where he ultimately was convicted of a homicide and spent the rest of his life. He was convicted for homicides here in Spokane as well, but never returned. So at this point in the 1960s, he remains an interesting subject, but not a man they can place probable cause on. We fast forward to what I would call the modern phase of this investigation. The picture below is of Detective Mindy Conley. She was a major crimes detective for a number of years and a remarkable detective. She could not be with us today, but she's aware of this. Mindy began the effort to re-examine the case forensically. DNA at this point was becoming more available to us in the Spokane area, and the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab, forensic scientist Lisa Turpin made efforts to actually find what do we have on the clothing. Semen was identified, a profile was developed, and that profile was uploaded to, compared to CODIS, or entered into CODIS. No hit has ever resulted from that to this day. But there still is a benefit to having that profile, is that we can do one-to-one comparisons with subjects. People that we are interested in, we can gather their DNA and begin eliminating subjects. And that happened for the next 20 years. One of the men that did many of those is seated right there, Brian Hammond, my predecessor on this. I should have a number, how many people have been compared. I don't know the number. But Brian finished up the work on Hugh Morris. Even though he admitted to many homicides and acknowledged that he molested children, he would not admit to Candy. And in fact, he passed a polygraph and his DNA does not match. So at this point, it's not Hugh Morris. People that know this case or have read the blogs and some of the articles that have been written will know what I'm talking about with the grape gum. The grape gum is something I want to take a little bit of time to address as to why it took on the life it did. Any homicide investigation, including current ones, when maybe they're not going well or moving as fast as we would like, detectives, citizens alike, you're stuck with what you have, and that thread will get pulled probably more than it should, and the value of what is considered evidence will be assigned a greater value than it deserves. That is my opinion of what happened with we're calling the grape gum. So I want to go over what that actually is. This is a picture of the jumper Candy was wearing at the time. Grape gum came from an observation made by a detective on March 23rd in 1959 during autopsy. This is what detectives do, and I'm not suggesting the detective did anything wrong. He made a note that the stain appeared to be gum and it had a grape smell to it. Somehow that morphed into fact that it is grape gum, and then somehow later on, the suggestion was it is a calling card that the killer smeared on Candy. Part of that goes with Hugh Morris, who was a grape gum chewer, and why he became interesting eventually. But to skip to the end, the DNA in that material is all female. So finally, after all this talking, I'm finally to the point of how this resolution comes. Brittany Wright, as much as any person that ever worked this case, deserves huge amounts of credit for showing us the way. She had been working other cases. She works many cold cases, and it came across a company called Othram. And Othram is here today. I'm very grateful for that, because I cannot possibly explain their science. But Brittany had trained me, I believe that's the appropriate word, over the years to be cautious with consuming DNA. The Candy Rogers DNA was very difficult to crack. We had tried, we presented it to another lab last year in 2020, hoping they could do it, and they declined it. They declared the DNA too degraded to work. So Brittany, I think it was February 5th, called me and said, I think we have a lab that can do this. And because I trust her, I made a call to them that day, and I was also impressed. Pulling up their website, you can see they've already solved a number of cases, and off it goes. By the first week of March, Candy Rogers' DNA is on the way to Texas. When we send a case like this out, for me it's similar to a moon mission, the Apollo rockets. The capsule goes onto the dark side of the moon. That's our case, it's gone. I don't know whether they're alive or dead. I'm hoping for the best, and I hope that someday the radio comes to life. So we go on for months, and we pretty much spend the summer of 2021 working leads that still come in on this case. Even after I've known who the killer is, we still get leads. This year, while I was waiting for my Apollo rocket to come back, people called in concerned that family members of theirs might be Candy Rogers' killer. We collected DNA near Portland, we collected DNA in Sandpoint, and we collected DNA in, I believe, Hilliard. All those samples were compared by Brittany Wright, and none of those people were responsible. So finally, the radio comes to life. It's on Labor Day weekend of this year when I start getting some cryptic texts and emails from David Middleman here, who is saying, hey, it might help to run this down, it might help to do this. I'm doing those things as fast as I can, but by the time I can report back to him those little details I was doing, he's moved on and said, don't worry about that anymore, we're past that. So I'm on a bunch of fool's errands at this point. But I have growing hope. He is not calling me about unnecessary details. This is the point where hope begins to bloom in this case. And on the night of September 6th, which is Monday of Labor Day weekend, They call, and the time in Texas at that time, I believe we were right around 8 or 9 p.m. on Labor Day weekend. He's the CEO of the company calling me. I'm almost afraid to answer the phone because it's going to be good news. So there's some amazing stuff to recognize here in what Othram did. Not only did they break, I'm using the word break and he'll correct me later, break this incredibly degraded DNA, their genealogists gave me a list of only 3 people. People into genealogy out there will understand that's incredible. We have other cases we've worked where the family tree is monstrous and it might take years to get through it and narrow it down. But 3 people. I'm dumbstruck on this conversation, and I'm afraid they think I'm an idiot. I can't even ask an intelligent question at this point. So it's a short phone call, and I drive into work that night and start doing the research on these 3 men. So John Ray Hoff appears to be the only one with children and a wife. I think they're still alive. I do some age calculations. You can all see it there. I don't need to repeat it. James would have been 19 and a half, so I think he's possible. But the younger brother, Terry, 16, maybe. But I'm really back to what is old-fashioned detective work now. My efforts are going to be to contact them and see if I can get any cooperation. And that is all over the spectrum as to what I might get at the other end of the line. I made a phone call first to daughter Kathy, and she's the only one that really wants her name used here, and I've got her permission to do that. Kathy didn't answer the phone at first, but her message ended, her voicemail ended with, "I hope you have a great day and God bless you." That's a good sign. That's a person who I think she at least will listen to me. So she calls back, and without giving her much information, I just said, "I'm working on a cold case and I need your help. I'm not disclosing details." She doesn't know the name Candy Rogers. She drives down to the police station and is there within 45 minutes. From there, I begin introducing her to the concept of why. She's confused as to how she can help. She's never been involved in anything bad in her life. And this is the beginning of a difficult relationship that I have with the family. I'm meeting good people. They're all good people. Excuse me. And I'm kind of wrecking their life. So, Kathy recognizes in our conversation that I need her DNA, and she volunteers it. So, that night I drive to Cheney. The next day I drive to Cheney with Kathy's DNA. And this is incredible because this is unfolding so fast. This case that's 62 years old is all of a sudden at light speed. I have this resource over here, which is like all of the DNA scientists in the Cheney section of the State Patrol Crime Lab. They are my giant crutch. Or I'm a burden to them at sometimes, but I appreciate them so much. Brittany burns the midnight oil, does the comparison, and we arrive at this number. This is essentially what we did was a paternity test. 2.9 million times more likely that the suspect is Kathy's father. That's essentially what it means. For those that have followed other cold case solves, we see astronomical numbers, right? Numbers that you just don't see anywhere else but in the DNA world. You saw in the video that I'm presented with a decision, and the concept of certainty is facing me again. What is my obligation to the public as a police officer to say this is it, this case is closed? I don't feel we're there yet, especially when I have, this is my personal opinion, and ultimately I'm wrong, but I have a concern that there is a brother out there that genealogy did not see, or that there is a paternity issue with Kathy. So, the most certain way to eliminate that concern is a one-to-one comparison with the actual suspect. That leads to the exhumation we did on September 23rd of this year with a search warrant at Riverside Cemetery, 508 North Government Way. This isn't something, it's sort of unpalatable to do this type of thing, but we're talking about the rape and murder and kidnapping of a 9-year-old girl. Before I'm going to hang the mantle of child killer, child rapist, kidnapper around a man's neck, even though he's dead, we're going to achieve that certainty the best that's possible. So this is a simple slide to read. It's confusing, but I want to point out, comparing DNA is not always easy. Brittany had to try several different techniques, several different parts of the body before she could do it. She wasn't able to do it overnight, and it took about a week or so. But finally, on October 1st, I got the phone call that gives us that astronomical number, 25 quintillion. We know with certainty that the semen found in Candy Rogers' underwear is John Ray Hobbs. The investigation continues, though. I want to talk to all the family involved and give them the opportunity to disagree with me or offer a reason why I might be wrong. And besides that, it's the decent thing to do, to talk to these people. I talked to the other siblings. Again, like Kathy, they're all great humans, and they think of nothing but Candy and her family and what they must have suffered through. They make the decision that because John Ray Hoff is buried in the same cemetery where Candy is interred, they don't want him there anymore, and they take it upon themselves to have him removed so that she can enjoy some peace. A little bit about the man. He did enter the Army early, I think at the push of his parents. He had been in some trouble, so they signed him up. His main job in the in the Army was protecting Fairchild. There was an agreement that Army manned the Nike missile sites that surrounded Fairchild at that time. Many of those places are defunct, but the buildings still stand. He did serve in Korea for a period. My best description of his job that I could find is inventory clerk to some degree. But military records are definitive that he is not in Korea when this happens. He is stationed in the Fairchild area. And military records record his address as being 2211 West Broadway. That's my final map here. So that is this is about 1 mile south of Candy Rogers' home, with Bell being the main route, Bell and Chestnut. So this picture, I'm fortunate to have it, and I thank the History Book Committee because they are so thorough in documenting the history of the Spokane Police Department. We have this photo. Otherwise, I don't know that we would have any. Police records in this matter are very frustrating. I can't find anything. The next photo, take note of the sketch that's done. The video already discussed what happened here, but there are some notes on the side of this sketch. One of the obvious questions that comes about with this guy, what else did he do? This level of crime, this isn't where a person starts. But to answer that question, I'm not certain. I don't have great records, and I'm at the mercy of public sites like Ancestry.com. The Spokesman Reviews site is helpful, and MyHeritage.com, where we got a lot of this information. But you will see, and this is part of the packet you'll get, there are report numbers referencing other crimes he committed. The woman he accosted in Brown's edition in 1961 is alive, and she's aware of this. I didn't tell her the name of the killer, but she did survive his attack in 1961. But there's a notation on the side of that sketch mentioning a rape. I'm going to continue to look into that, but I don't know much about it right now. I know that's a question that'll come later. Because of that conviction, he was declared a deserter with the Army and discharged. He spent the rest of his life in various jobs. He sold Cutco cutlery. He worked at Western Pine Lumber, which I believe was at 200 East Jackson in Spokane. And he finally worked at the Armour meatpacking plant. There he received a chemical burn to his face, and his life finally ended in suicide in 1970 at the age of 31. Part of, for people that know this case, anytime you searched for Candy, this picture over here of her with the dog, I'm a dog lover, so I'm going to end this with the dog story because I believe that was Candy's dog for a long time, and I researched trying to find the name of that dog for a long time. The dog's name is Shep, but that does not look like Shep. So to end my spiel here, credit where credit is due, again with the Spokesman Review article, this is Shep. They took a picture of Shep. Very sad. So, I'm going to introduce David Middleman now, who is a hero to me. Thank you for solving this case.
I appreciate you having us here, and we're so appreciative to have been able to assist on this case. My name is David Middleman, and I'm the CEO of Othram. We're actually the only company in the United States that can perform these kind of techniques fully in-house. Identifying suspects and unidentified persons from crime scenes is all we do. It's the only thing we do. And again, it's entirely in-house. And we've obsessed over the last couple of years about iterating on every step of that process so that everything we do from the first step to the last, from evidence in to answers out, is optimized and perfected just for this one purpose. And so we can generally access cases, as Detective Sturman had mentioned, that a lot of other folks will not be able to access. It's all we do, it's our hyper focus, and we've taken on a number of cases that have either had DNA that's not good enough, the DNA quality is too low, or there's not enough quantity. And it's times like this when we can help assist in a case as serious as this one, with as much collateral damage as this case has had, that it makes that iteration and kind of toiling away in the lab worth it. And I guess the other thing I'd like to mention is just that, this is a case that has spanned 6 decades, and so much incredible investigative work and forensic work over the years. And all that was needed to push this case over the barrier to the finish line was just a little bit of extra detail, a few extra clues that we were grateful to be able to deliver to the detective on Labor Day weekend. And so I just want to point out that if you can have this kind of an outcome for a case from 1959 with imperfect DNA, it should give hope to so many other cases. There's a huge backlog of cases involving homicide with an element of sexual violence, many of these towards women and children, and these cases are solvable. They just require a little bit more than what's currently been available over the last several years. We have technology now that could be applied. It should be applied, and I think although this is an extraordinary event today, I would hope in a few years' time this becomes ordinary. And I think everyone should demand and expect that these cases can be solved. So very grateful, Detective, that you let us participate, Chief, and also the forensics crew. Just very, very appreciative to have been involved. And I think I'll probably answer questions at the end. Thank you.
Good morning. This is a bittersweet moment for all of us, and definitely more bitter than sweet. You had the kidnapping of an innocent 9-year-old who was brutally and violently assaulted and murdered. A 9-year-old who had absolutely no concept of evil that exists. There are few crimes that are more impactful to a family member than the murder of a loved one. That crime is exponentially worsened by the unsolving of that murder. We have major crimes detectives that are absolutely relentless in their pursuit of our murderers. We have had many hands that have touched this case, from police officers to detectives, from multiple agencies, from all over the area. And while we weren't able to bring the suspect to justice in this case, it is our hope that at least by solving this case, it brings a measure of comfort and closure to the family, to the loved ones in the community as well. And it is just a testament to how amazing our major crimes detectives are. Every murder in this city is relentlessly pursued by our detectives. As you heard Lieutenant Tigan say, that if you commit a murder in the city of Spokane, you will always be looking over your shoulder, because we will never stop looking for you. So with that, I will have our MC, Lieutenant Tigan, coordinate questions.
All right, that's the conclusion of our speakers. We'll go ahead and take questions now. If you could be very specific about who you would like to answer your question, that would be helpful, because some of us don't have the technical knowledge that others do. So let's go ahead and begin. Who would like to go first? Go ahead.
I have a question for David, because I think of the DNA process and the specific process that you're able to use to test these really smaller ingredients that other people don't have the ability to do.
Did you hear the question?
So I believe your question was about how we're able to access some of these more challenging. Yeah, so a lot, just to give you a perspective, when you do one of those consumer DNA tests or a medical test, you swab your cheek or spit in a tube, you're collecting the unit of measure people use is called a nanogram, and you're collecting about 1,000 nanograms of DNA in one of these medical tests. So a lot of the technology that's built for typical DNA testing kind of centers around the fact that you're going to have a lot of DNA, 1,000 nanograms, and it's fresh DNA. It just came out of a living person. There's no bacteria or other things that are there that may have accumulated over the decades. It's not a mixture of multiple folks. It's just single source, great to work with DNA. The kind of DNA that the forensics folks will never get to see, unfortunately. In a case like the cases that we work at Othram, we're generally given anywhere from 1 nanogram to 1/10 of a nanogram. So there's a huge difference here between 1,000 nanograms that come out of a typical DNA process and something that we're getting. We're getting like 1/10 of a nanogram to 1 nanogram. And so we've just had to engineer other technologies to enable input of such small amounts of DNA. We have processes that we use that can help separate the human DNA from other DNA that could come from bacteria or other things that have accumulated over the years. We have ways that in vitro we can repair DNA. It sounds kind of futuristic, but we can try to piece pieces of the DNA back together. We've developed tools that can access small fragments of DNA. When DNA gets really old, it goes from these large, nice pieces to little tiny pieces. It's like dropping a piece of glass on the floor and it breaks into little shards. But we have very sensitive tools that can pick up even the smallest shards and get information. And all of this is premised on a technology called DNA sequencing. It's something that's not widely used right now in forensics. I think it will eventually be used very widely in forensics. It took over the entire medical industry about 10 years ago, and I think we'll do the same in forensics. So just to say, lots of laboratory technique, a lot of computer wizardry as well to help sort out the data that comes off that machine to determine like what is the real DNA information versus what is the noise or error that you might see in a challenging to work with DNA. So probably more than you wanted to know, but as I had said, this is all we do, and so we can afford to over-specialize and really over-tune our approach to make sure that we can access quite literally any kind of DNA. As long as there's DNA, there's a good shot that we'll be able to pull some information on it that we could then deliver to a detective or to law enforcement.
Sorry, one more question. Can you remind me what you said? You're the only lab in the country that does specialization on what?
We're the only company in the United States that operates a lab that can perform this kind of work fully in-house. So you can drop evidence at our door. In this case, we actually received the DNA extract from the forensic team, but you can drop DNA evidence at our door. We can perform the DNA extraction, do all the laboratory testing, the investigative lead generation that Detective Storment talked to you about. We're the only company that offers this fully in-house, and so it's very private, very secure, and extremely accurate because we've been able to tune this process. There's no other company that can operate this from evidence to answers.